What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? StormStrikerSX9 here with another video talking about what I would like to see in the future for the Nintendo Switch Online service. This time, these games will be for the Game Boy system. I will be doing a separate one for Game Boy Color. This particular one is for Game Boy, and Game Boy Pocket. So yeah, mainly Game Boy. Well, again, Game Boy Color will be in a separate video, even though they're in the same thing together, but yeah. All right. I got a fair amount of games also in my wish list here. So yeah, a lot of these will be hidden gems. Some of them will probably be some that you guys never heard of, or maybe you have remembered the game from your childhood, you know? But anyways, let's get through these games, shall we? The first game is Kirby's Block Ball. I'd like to see this get added to the Nintendo Switch Online for the Game Boy at some point. Final Fantasy Legends 2. Just so you know, these are not in alphabetical order, so it will be random. All right, next. Adventure Island. I'd like to see this game get added at some point. Pokemon Blue version. This is a highly requested game. I would love to see this be added to the Nintendo Switch Online service for the Game Boy at some point. Adventure Island 2. Solar Striker. Kirby's Pinball Land. Wario Blast featuring Bomberman. This is a hidden gem for the Game Boy system. I would love to see this get added. It's basically Wario crossing over with Bomberman. Battletoads in Ragnarok's World. Adventures of Lulu. Gradius Interstellar Assault. Donkey Kong Land 2. This is one of those highly requested Donkey Kong games as well. Yes, there Donkey Kong Land 1 and 3 as well. Would love to see those as well. Xenon 2. Roland's Curse 2. Spider-Man and X-Man for the Game Boy. It's probably going to be a tough one to get added because of it being with Marvel. Roland's Curse. Roland's Curse is another one of those forgotten gems for the Game Boy system. Wario Land, Super Mario Land 3. This one is also highly requested as well. Chase HQ. Crystal Quest. This is a hidden gem for the Game Boy system as well. Solomon's Club. Another hidden gem for the Game Boy system. Bomberman Game Boy. This one's probably highly requested. Prophecy, Viking Child. This is from the Wizards and Warriors game franchise Prophecy Viking Child. I would love to see that game get added. This is also another hidden gem for the Game Boy. Pokemon Red version. Again, I would like to see Pokemon be added to the Game Boy Online service at some point. Unless you got other plans for them. It'll be a nice shadow drop. Kirby's Star Stacker Game Boy version. I know last time we got something similar to this. It was the Super Nintendo / Super Famicom version of Kirby Star Stacker. Nemesis. Final Fantasy Adventures. This is from the saga of the Final Fantasy games. Donkey Kong 1994. Spider-Man 3. Again, this one's probably going to be hard to do because of it being with Marvel. But I would love to see that get added. Pretty good classic. Wizards and Warriors Fortress of Fear. Poppin' Twinbee. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy as well. Cosmo Tank. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy. Kid Dracula. This one's highly requested, I bet. Ninja Gaiden Shadow. This is a hidden gem for the Game Boy as well. Bubble Bobble. Battle Unit Zeoth. Turok Battle of the Dinosaurs. This is a hidden gem for the Game Boy as well. Pokemon Yellow version. Again, I would like to see the Pokemon games get added to the Nintendo Switch Online service for the Game Boy at some point. Unless you got plans for it, that it's something for, maybe it'll be in its own package. Turrican. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy. Great Greed. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy. Tetris Attack. Bubble Bobble 2, or Part 2. Donkey Kong Land. This is highly requested as well. Most of the Donkey Kong games are going to be highly requested. Battletoads Game Boy version. This one's probably going to be a pretty good one to add because it's also with Rare as well. Well, Trade West, but it's still Rare. Bionic Commando. Contra the Alien Wars. Super RC Pro-Am. This is a hidden gem for the Game Boy as well. Radar Mission. This is a hidden gem for the Game Boy as well, but it was also at one point on the 3DS Virtual Console for Game Boy. So you never know. It could be added to the Game Boy Online for Nintendo Switch at some point. Super Battle Tanks. This is a hidden gem for the Game Boy as well. RoboCop vs. Terminator. I bet you this one's highly requested and is also a hidden gem for the Game Boy. However, on top of this, I would also like to see either the Sega Genesis version of RoboCop versus Terminator or the Super Nintendo version of RoboCop versus Terminator, unless you got plans to remake RoboCop versus Terminator. Although this is from Interplay, so it might be a hard one to get added. A tough one. Licensing and stuff. Night Quest. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy. Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters. This is another one that was on the 3DS at some point via the 3DS Virtual Console. Well, the Virtual Console for the Game Boy side. The Castlevania Adventures. This one's also highly requested as well. Bo Jackson's 2 games in 1. This is another hidden gem, but also a very good game of mine that I had in my childhood. Love to see this get added at some point, but it would probably have a tough time getting added because of it being part of the MLB licensing. So, again, this is also another classic for the Game Boy. 2 games in 1. Baseball and football. Final Fantasy Legend 3. Side Pocket. This is another hidden gem from the Game Boy, but it's also one that I had as a kid. This is another game that I had as a kid growing up. Wario Land 2. Legend of the River King Game Boy. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy as well. Battle Arena Toshinden. That's another hidden gem for the Game Boy as well. Could it get added? You never know. Mole Mania. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy as well. Killer Instinct Game Boy version. This particular version of Killer Instinct was on the Game Boy and was very popular being played on the Super Nintendo via the Super Game Boy that you could get for the Super Nintendo or the Super Famicom. I'm pretty sure it's also highly requested as well. But again, this is the Game Boy version of Killer Instinct that we recently got for the Super Nintendo not too long ago. The Amazing Spider-Man. This is another childhood game of mine that I had as a kid. Would love to see added to the Nintendo Game Boy online service. But again, also be one that it will be hard to be added because of licensing with Marvel and Disney. Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. Goemon. This is another highly requested game as well as a hidden gem for the Game Boy as well. I would love to see this added at some point. Battleship. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy as well. I would also like to see the Nintendo Entertainment System version of Battleship as well get added at some point. It's a very popular game. But yeah. Metal Masters, another hidden gem for the Game Boy. Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge. This is another highly requested game for the Game Boy. The Final Fantasy Legend. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy. Fortified Zone. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy. Donkey Kong Land 3. This is another highly requested game for the Game Boy. Gonna get at it? Hopefully it does. Hopefully all 3 of the Donkey Kong lands get added. Monster Truck Wars. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy from Acclaim Entertainment. Total Carnage. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy. Dandelion Opus. This is another childhood game of mine that I had as a kid. Is also a hidden gem for the Game Boy as well. It could get added. You never know. It might be one of those that you probably never asked for too, but as a kid, I had loads of fun with it. It's a puzzle game, by the way. This is a puzzle game. Iron Man, Exo, Manowar, and Heavy Metal. This is another game that could get added at some point, but it'll also be one that'll be tough to be added because of licensing with Marvel and Disney. Alright guys, that'll do it for this video of me showing off what I would like to see for the Game Boy system for the future of the Nintendo Switch online service. It wasn't very many, it was a lot of games, yes, but this time we didn't go over a long time. This is about 72 games in my wish list for the Game Boy. A bunch of these could be shadow drops, so we never know. Anyways, part 2 of my wish list for Game Boy. So if you're still watching, next up is my wish list that I would like to see added to the Game Boy Nintendo Switch Online service via the Game Boy Color section. Alright guys, so the games that I have here are Alien Thanatos Encounters. This one will probably be a hard one to add with THQ, but also Aliens. It'll be a hard, just because of licensing, but you never know, it could. Quest for Camelot is on there, so, and that's with DreamWorks. Next up, we got Armorines from Acclaim Entertainment. Asteroids. This one's from Activision. Battle Tanks. This is the Game Boy Color version of Battle Tanks. Bionic Commando Elite Forces. Bomberman Max Blue Champion. Bomberman Max Red Champion. Challenger. Sorry. I read that as champion at first. Challenger. Bomberman Quest. Conker's Pocket Tales. This one's from Rare. And is also it's a hidden gem for the Game Boy Color as well. Probably one that's also been forgotten. Crystalis. This is the Game Boy Color version of Crystalis. Donkey Kong Country. This is the Game Boy Color version of Donkey Kong Country. Pretty sure this one is also forgotten as well. I don't even know if Nintendo even remembers doing a Game Boy Color version of Donkey Kong Country, but there it is. Box art in general. Could it get added? It would be an interesting shadow drop. Dragon Warrior 1 and 2. This is the Game Boy Color version of Dragon Warriors 1 and 2, also known as Dragon Quest. Dragon Warrior 3, also known as Dragon Quest 3. This is the Game Boy Color version of Dragon Warrior 3. Highly requested as well. Dragon Warrior Monsters, also known as Dragon Quest Monsters. Dragon Warrior Monsters 2, Kobe's Journey, Dragon Warrior Monsters 2, Terra's Adventure, Galaga. This is the Game Boy Color version of Galaga. Heroes of Might and Magic. Heroes of Might and Magic 2. Legend of the River King Game Boy Color version. Legend of the River King 2 Game Boy Color. Lufia, The Legend Returns. This is the Game Boy Color version of Lufia. If you remember the Lufia games, I believe it started out on the Super Nintendo / Super Famicom system. Magination or Magi Nation. Mega Man X Extreme. As you remember, we recently did get 5 Mega Man games from the Game Boy itself. However, Mega Man Extreme is on the Game Boy Color. It's basically the Game Boy Color version of Mega Man X, as you can see by the X in front of Extreme. Probably also highly requested as well, and is also a hidden gem for the Game Boy Color. It's probably also forgotten. Mega Man Extreme 2, again, highly requested, hidden gem, and probably forgotten as well. Game Boy Color version of Metal Gear Solid. This is a hidden gem from the Game Boy Color as well. It's probably forgotten. And it's also probably highly requested as well. Metal Walker. This is another hidden gem from the Game Boy Color. It's probably also forgotten as well. Monster Rancher Explorer. This is basically the Game Boy Color version of Monster Rancher games. It'll probably be a hard one to be added due to licensing, but you never know. It could get added. Monster Rancher Battle Card Game Boy Color. This is basically the trading card game version of Monster Rancher. Again, it could be hard to get added because of licensing with Monster Rancher, but you never know, it could happen. Game Boy Color version of Perfect Dark. We recently got the Nintendo 64 version of Perfect Dark not too long ago. This is the Game Boy Color version of the game. Could it get added? You never know. Also, this is probably also, I keep saying probably in the same sentence, sorry. This is a hidden gem as well as forgotten as well. So I keep saying as well. I guess I like that word as well. Anyways, here is Pitfall Beyond the Jungle. This could get added as well, and is also a hidden gem for the Game Boy Color. This one's highly requested. Pokemon Crystal version for the Game Boy Color. Pokemon Gold version. Pokemon Puzzle Challenge. Pokemon Silver version. Portal Runner. This is the Game Boy Color version of Portal Runner. You probably remember this game from the PlayStation 1, or rather PlayStation 2. It was on both, but still, this is the Game Boy Color version of Portal Runner. And it's also a hidden gem for the Game Boy Color as well. Power Quest. This is probably also a hidden gem for the Game Boy Color, as well as a highly requested game. Quest Brian's Journey. This is basically the Game Boy Color version of Quest 64, but on the Game Boy Color. Quest Fantasy Challenge. Another hidden gem for the Game Boy Color. Rayman. This is the Game Boy Color version of Rayman 1. Rayman 2, again, Game Boy Color version of Rayman 2. Resident Evil Gaiden. This is another hidden gem for the Game Boy Color. Could it get added? You never know. Revelations: The Demon Slayer. This game comes from the Shin Megami Tensei games, also part of Persona. This could get added at some point. It's from Atlas. This is also one of my childhood games that I had when I was a kid as well. I highly recommend it. Robopon Sun version. This is a hidden gem for the Game Boy Color, and is probably also forgotten as well. It's part of the Robopon franchise. This one will also be hard to get added because of licensing as well. But you never know, it could get added. Shadowgate Classic. This is the Game Boy Color version of Shadowgate. Another hidden gem for the Game Boy Color as well. Shantae. This one's probably highly requested for the Game Boy Color Online for the Nintendo Switch. Could it get added? You never know. It could also be a major shadow drop. It could also get a remake. You never know. This one is for the Japanese side of the Game Boy Color, but could get translated and added to the Nintendo Game Boy Color Online on the Switch. Just note that the English translation version of this game is fan-made, but you never know, it could get added. Again, this is also a highly requested game, as well as a hidden gem for the Game Boy Color. It wasn't even released in the Americas side, by the way. It was Japanese only. Super Mario Brothers Deluxe, which is basically the Game Boy Color version of Super Mario Brothers, the Nintendo Entertainment System version. But this is the Game Boy Color version of that. Tomb Raider. This is the Game Boy Color version of Tomb Raider. Again, it'll probably be hard to get added, but you never know, since we did get Quest for Camelot. And Alone in the Dark. Tomb Raider, Curse of the Sword. This one could also be added, you never know. Be a major shadow drop, as well as another hidden gem from the Game Boy Color. A lot of these Game Boy Color games are probably going to be forgotten, but some of y'all out there probably remember them. Tonic Trouble. This is the Game Boy Color version of Tonic Trouble. The other one that I showed you was the Nintendo 64 version. This one could get added as well. Again, it's with Ubisoft, so it could have a hard time getting added. Top Gear Pocket. This is a hidden gem for the Game Boy Color as well. Top Gear Pocket 2. Fun fact about the Top Gear Pocket game. The first one came in a cartridge that had a built-in rumble pack in it. You put a battery in, it gives you rumble features. Could it get added? It's another hidden gem for the Game Boy Color. You never know. Top Gun Firestorm. Towers. Hold on. Lord Benaf's Deceit. Sorry, I had to scroll that because I was having a hard time reading it. This is a hidden gem from the Game Boy Color as well. Warlocked. This is another childhood game of mine, and I highly request this to be added as well. This is basically the Game Boy Color version of Warcraft, in a sense. Sort of. It pits you with humans, orcs, and elves, and dwarves. 4 races right there. Like I said, it's basically the Game Boy Color version of Warcraft, but it's called Warlocked. I highly request this. Warriors of Might and Magic. Another highly requested Game Boy Color game for the Game Boy Color Online, part of the Game Boy service. This is also another one that I had in my childhood as well. And the last but not least, Yu-Gi-Oh! Dark Duel Stories. This one will probably be a tough one to be added, but you never know. It could be a major shadow drop. Also, it could be another lineup of trading card games to be added alongside the Pokemon trading card game for the Game Boy Color. I highly request this to get added. Please, Nintendo, make it happen. All right. And that'll do it for this side of my wish list for the Game Boy Online for Nintendo Switch. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, comment below, share with your friends and affairs, and click that subscribe button. And also click the notification bell to know when I upload new videos. Let me know in the comments below how you liked my wish list of what I picked for the Game Boy side as well as the Game Boy Color side. Let me know what your wish list is in the comments below as well. Let me know what you would like to see added or what your predictions could be. But yeah, see you guys next time.